Hello and welcome to the CFB edition of the Super Show. I'm your host, Walt Waddell, aka Dub Deuces, and as always, the show is brought to you presented by the one and only FTN Network. Check it out behind me. I've been talking about it for a few weeks, saying, hey guys, man, I'm working on some upgrades for the show. Got some cool stuff happening, gonna have a banner. Took a while, had to have it made, came all the way from China, so it took quite some time, but it's here. It's here. Here, let's get rid of that real quick. And yeah, let's check it out. Let's check it out, guys. Let's check it out. I got it. So I'm still working on the lighting, and I'm upgrading the camera because right now the camera I have, let's face it, it's not the best. And as the Super Show continues to rise, we're going to have to upgrade our equipment. So right here, when the CFB version of the show is going on, we got the banner going there. And then, right underneath when we need to switch, hold on. Let me get, I'm super excited to show you guys this. All right. I'm super jacked. I don't know how much you can see there, but the CBB version of the Super Show, baby. Let's go. Yeah. I love it. I love it. We've been doing a lot of work. I got to thank my wife, who has been helping me a lot. She has been really the driving force behind upgrading this here show, and she did some soundproofing for me. We got the soundproofing stuff in the back there. Gonna have a soundproofing behind here with the new mic and just all kinds of goodness, happening. And I'm excited. I'm really, really excited. So appreciate you that has been, kicking it with me this summer and really just, doing our thing the whole time, previewing college basketball, previewing college football. I mean, we're into July 19th now, July 20th, for those of you who are on the East Coast from the future. And, we're really just a little over a month before week 0. And before you know it, I'm going to have my man, Jay Kuchek, my partner and co-host in crime here. We're going to be previewing now week 0, DFS, sports betting opportunities, prize picks. We're going to be talking about all that stuff. And it's here. It's happening. It is absolutely super exciting. And I'm just totally jacked about this background. So very fun. We're upgrading. One thing, I do want to say, make sure you guys are checking out TBT. We did, first day of the tournament today, TBT, threw 4 prize picks up there that we're pretty comfortable with, and all 4 of them hit. First halves on many of those players, they gave us a mini heart attack, but in the end they came through, and we go 4 for 4 on day 1 of the TBT. So, niche sports is where it's at. That's my thing. That's what I do, and I'll be continuing to cover TBT throughout the course of the tournament and just doing our thing there. Still doing WNBA, of course. Got a write-up for tomorrow's slate. There's 10K to first tournament tomorrow, and then Tuesday there's a 20K to first. So there is just ridiculous things happening. I'm super jazzed. All right, so let's get right into the college football stuff here. We previewed the Pac-12. We talked about the transfer portal. Last week we talked in depth about the Big Ten. And this week I want to get a chance to really delve into the Big 12. And I want to make these when it comes to my shows, my content, my preview, I'm pretty robust when it comes to the content. And the shows tend to be long. And I really want these to be kind of quicker, just really easy to process, easy to digest type of shows. And I'm really going to kind of blow through each team, give a projected depth chart, maybe, some players to look for, and then just boom, go to the next one. Because otherwise, I could be here for 4 or 5 hours. If there was an audience to listen to me, hell, even if there wasn't an audience to listen to me, I'd talk about this stuff, all day, all night. I'm all about it. So I am going to go through each team depth chart wise, talk a little bit about the players that, obviously that we know coming back are going to be fantasy relevant, and then maybe some that you don't know about that are going to be fantasy relevant as well. The Big 12 is different, of course. We've had the Pac-12, they're adding some members, other conferences losing members, adding members. The Big 12 going into this season will have 14 members. So, kind of silly there with the Big 12 having more than 12 members, but it is the era of NIL, the area of probably super conferences coming, and it's led by that football money. So it probably won't be too long before we're heading towards some really, super conference type stuff in football. I don't particularly want to see that, but I just don't know how we avoid that at this point. All right, so the teams in the Big 12 this year will be your Baylor Bears, the BYU Cougars coming over there, the University of Cincinnati Bearcats, new team to the conference, University of Houston, another Cougars. There's Shasta, and not to be fused with Cosmo the Cougar there at BYU. Iowa State Cyclones, Kansas Jayhawks, the Kansas State Wildcats coming off of their fun season there with Deuce Vaughn, Oklahoma Sooners, Oklahoma State Cowboys, the TCU Horned Frogs, who had a dream season, right? Texas Longhorns, we're back. And Texas Tech Red Raiders, UCF Knights, another new team in the conference. And lastly, but maybe not least, the West Virginia Mountaineers. So those are the teams we're going to talk about. A ton to go with. Let's start with the Baylor Bears with it, though. Let's pull up Baylor's football depth chart, or what I project to be their depth chart. And I really want to put together something. I don't know if I'm going to have the time, so I don't want to commit to it, but I want to kind of get to the site, like conference, along with the shows that I'm doing, kind of like a depth chart that we can throw up there so people can kind of reference teams and look at it as well. I don't know that we'll get to that this season. Definitely going to try. But if not, we're going to provide you with that information in the Discord, as always. It will have a ton of updated information on depth charts, which I'll be posting each and every week prior to the games, whether it's a action slate on a Wednesday, a showdown slate on a Thursday, the full slate on Saturday. I'm going to be providing that content for you each and every week. So no worries there either way. All right. So for Baylor, Blake Shapen stepping in there, obviously he was the guy last year, will be the guy again. Expect him to really be able to produce at a fairly high level, somebody that we're going to be able to, I think, use, fairly regularly when it comes down to it. He wasn't priced that high on a game-to-game basis, and it really did turn in some decent games. Not the consistent option that maybe we would want him to be necessarily, but I do think he steps into a role where he's going to be able to produce at a much higher level for us here. As long as he doesn't come into the season price something ridiculous. If he's like a 6'5 guy, 7K guy, I think he's definitely going to have an opportunity to be interesting. Did throw for 18 touchdowns, picked off 10 times there, almost 3,000 yards, 63% completion rating there. That's not good. Okay. I need to pause because that was really not good what just happened outside. So sorry, guys. Give me one. All right, we're back. Yeah, I don't know what that was, but we're okay. We're good. We're in the studio. All right. With Blake Shapen, I think, like I said, he's going to be a relatively strong fantasy performer, not somebody that is going to put up ceiling games necessarily, but somebody we can definitely rely on. I think he has the ability to show off his legs a little bit more. Last year Baylor had a kind of a revolving door there at running back at times. Richard Reese settled in there, was almost a 1,000-yard rusher, but Craig Williams had his chance. Quaylon Jones didn't really allow Chapin to do as much on the ground, did have 100 yards and 2 touchdowns, but I think he can give us a little bit more this year. At the running back spot, it is Richard Reese again. They're still going to be super deep at running back. I don't love this, and I think pricing is going to come into it. It was a little bit frustrating at times with Baylor. 2-3 years ago, they were really easy when it came to predicting their rushing stuff with their 2021 team, right? Abram Smith was our guy. He rushed for 1,600 yards. People rarely ever rostered him. Treston Ebner was the guy, almost 30 catches, 300 yards. So kind of that change of pace dude. And he was a very big, pass catcher, also rushed for 800 yards. So you knew that with Bohannon there, those two guys were going to get a lot of the rushing yards. Bohannon also had over 300 yards, but it was very condensed. And you knew Abram Smith was going to get a lot of work. Last year's team, Reese comes into it. He was super chalk after a big week. He'd have some kind of down games. Everybody would jump off, then he'd go off again. Then it was like, oh, Craig Williams is going off this week. Let's go to him. Oh, Quaylon Jones, let's try him. And it just was very, very hard to peg. At the end of the day and by the end of the season, Richard Reese did kind of separate himself out there. 14 touchdowns, almost 1,000 yards. Craig Williams was second, though, 600 yards, 4 touchdowns. And then you had Quaylon Jones, 462 yards, 7 touchdowns. Also caught 23 passes for 135 yards. So a lot of work there. Tay McWilliams, who I really liked coming into that season, really, 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 really high on him. Didn't quite work out for him. Couldn't get healthy, just couldn't play. So it didn't work, end up happening for him. So looking at it now, Reese obviously sits there and Quaylon Jones. Like those two guys, definitely. They have a freshman by the name of Bryson Washington that looks decent. And they do bring in a intra-conference transfer from Oklahoma State in Dom Richardson. So Dominic Richardson, who a lot of people liked from Oklahoma State, comes into a situation where he was also in a kind of a shared backfield where he wasn't the primary ball carrier every single time, right? Ollie Gordon was in the mix, Jaden Nixon, other guys. Richardson in 9 games played because he had some health issues as well. 543 yards, 8 touchdowns, 22 catches for 220 yards. So he definitely profiles as a guy who can be productive in this offense for Baylor. But I foresee a lot of tilt with this team again at the running back spot. Because I'm looking at them legitimately having guys, Jones can catch the ball. We know Dom Richardson can catch the ball. Reese can run for the tough yardage. He's going to get a bunch of touchdowns, but I just feel like the cannibalization there, there'll be weeks Reese rushes for 150, but there'll also be weeks where he rushes for 30 yards and suddenly Quaylon Jones gets the 2 scores. And if I am right about Blake Shapen being more involved in the running game, we could see what happens there. So the Baylor running backs, we're going to be definitely using them, but it's going to be very price dependent on me, and I'm certainly not going to be eating chalk with that group just to eat it. If it's a week coming into it and Reese is going to be 50% owned because he had a big game the prior week, I will gladly fade him, especially if we get a read on somebody like a Dom Richardson or a Quaylon Jones. 2 years ago, we were always right, seemingly with Abram Smith, and I don't know why people wouldn't roster him. Last year, not as right with the Baylor backs. I can admit that. At the wide receiver position, looking at it, Hal Presley and Monterey Baldwin, those are the names that you'll remember. They also bring in a transfer by the name of Ketron Jackson, an Arkansas transfer who definitely has talent. So that is going to be the primary receivers there. Looking at it, Presley, 32 catches, 382 yards, 4 touchdowns. Baldwin, 33 catches, 565 yards, and 4 touchdowns. So not like super stellar stats by any means. I think the continuity there with Shapen will certainly help. The addition of Jackson, definitely a bright spot for the team. But I think that they're going to continue to be kind of known as a running football team, and there's going to be a lot of rushing stats for this team. And when it comes to DFS, I think that's the majority of the time where people are going to be looking, not necessarily going to be looking at the Baylor passing game. And there will be weeks where they go off, right? That's something that we're accustomed to over the last few seasons. But ordinarily, it will be more of a GPP type of look. And when you look at Arkansas last year, where Ketron Jackson comes from, he was 4th on the team 16 catches, 277 yards, 3 touchdowns. Landers, of course, 901 yards. Hazelwood, 704, and Trey Knox, 287. So I think Jackson can definitely do well here and has shown himself an ability to kind of stretch the field at times there. So that wraps up, or let's look at tight ends, actually. They do, okay, so they have Drake Dabney, and then they bring in another transfer, Jake the Snake Roberts. Always fun to say that when someone's named Jake Roberts. Roberts coming in from North Texas. Let's pull that up real quick. The Mean Green, they had Austin on, who that's Jake's guy, would have these breakout games, and then he would totally disappear. Threw for 33 touchdowns, but looking at it for last year's stats, let's see. Jake Roberts, 28 catches, 394 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Definitely something similar like that coming into it with Baylor, somewhere between 300 and 400 yards, 3 to 4 touchdowns. Certainly going to be an option at times, but again, I like the running game here for Baylor much, much more. All right, moving down the line, we're going to go to BYU, which is it's so weird, man. Like, it's going to take me some time to get to these new teams and new conferences and such, because I'm so used to them being, in elsewhere. BYU is going to look a little bit different. During the transfer show a couple weeks ago, we talked about that. They do bring in at quarterback Kadon Slovis. That will be certainly an interesting spot there for him. We'll see how he works. They do also bring in Jake Retzloff, who is another transfer junior out of Riverside CC. A lot of chatter for him, at least being a serviceable guy. If something were to happen, Slovis, with his history, of course, there may be times where they need Retzloff to play. So we'll see. Running back position, stacked. The BYU running game has been super strong over the last couple of years. That has been a team that we've oftentimes really, really hammered the RB1. We've gotten away with some backup RBs. They do return Hinckley, Ropate, and Miles Davis. I actually really like Miles Davis, but they bring in UNLV transfer Aiden Robbins, who is clearly going to be the RB1, or at least get carries early on that way. And then Colorado transfer Deion Smith. So shoring it up. BYU, they're usually successful when they have multiple options in the running game, and they usually have had a quarterback that contribute in that way too. But with Kadon Slovis, that's not really going to be the case. That's not really his game. So when you're looking at it in the rushing yards last year, Christopher Brooks, 800 yards, 6 touchdowns. Jaron Hall, now not there anymore, rushed for 350. Lopini Katoda, who had been there for many, many years, 332 yards, 2 touchdowns. Miles Davis, 225 yards. And then Ropati, 189 yards and a touchdown. I do like Ropati and Davis if they end up being like the RB2 in front of Deion Smith. But otherwise, Aiden Robbins is clearly going to be the guy and the top DFS option in that backfield. At UNLV, came into the season priced pretty cheaply, way underpriced, was super chalky for a while, kind of fell by the wayside at times, but it finished the season strong, over 1,000 yards, 9 touchdowns on 209 carries, just a tick under 5 yards per carry. Certainly looking forward to seeing what he will bring to the table. But his first real season last year of getting, blind share of the carries, he certainly did quite well. And he's a very, very good ball carrier, takes care of the ball, and he's an adequate pass catcher as well. Over 120 yards on 23 catches last year with UNLV. They still at the tight end position, still pretty strong. Isaac Rex, who's just a touchdown machine. Mason Wake, Anthony Olson, and Ethan Erickson. So they have their plethora of options there, but Isaac Rex is definitely the guy with most of the touchdown equity at the tight end position for them. Chase Roberts returns, Keanu Hill, Cody Epps. Very strong receiving group that they bring back. They also bring in a transfer, Darius Lassiter, who I really, really like, from Eastern Michigan. Productive in the MAC last year during his time. Came from a community college where he was very strong originally there. Now he gets a chance to play in an upper tier conference. We'll see how he does. I definitely like him coming into this group. They also have another transfer by the name of Keelan Marion, who was at UConn a year ago. So shoring up that position, they definitely are. I don't know, maybe they're going to transform the offense a little bit. We'll see. Typically, we can rely on their running game, but they have 3, 4, 5 guys that can definitely support a stronger passing game if Slovis can stay healthy. And then they have some freshmen down the road, a guy like Koa Eldridge, who looks really, really good for the future. So I'm feeling this team on BYU a lot. Do I think they're going to win a bunch of games? I'm a little bit sour on them, but I like the pieces, and I think they're going to be a team that we certainly talk about with regularity whenever they're on the slate, and we'll see how it shakes out. But I'm certainly on board with the BYU coming into obviously a tougher conference. It's going to take some time to get used to, but they have added some pieces, and so having Slovis, who has already played in the upper tier conferences, that will certainly help them to a degree. Defensively, I'm not sure how good they're going to be, and they might get smacked around. Last year, their defense was already pretty horrible. Now you're asking them to go up against a much tougher difficulty, of teams here. It just doesn't seem like they're going to win very many games, but that's a good thing for DFS purposes. So Aiden Robbins, Keaton Slovis, excellent, but they're probably not going to win that many games. All right, moving right along here, Cincinnati. Another team coming into the Big 12 team. They had to hit the transfer portal, and they did a pretty decent job. Seems wild that Emory Jones is around. Has eligibility. It seems like he should be done at this point, but the extra year to a lot of different players. So Emory Jones transferring from originally, obviously, Florida to Arizona State, and now he's going to be bringing in the Big 12 era of Cincy football with the Bearcats. Also, they're really going to be turning it over to him, but they do have Evan Prater, who is at least decent enough if it comes down to it. At the running back position, Corey Kiner, Miles Montgomery, and Ryan Montgomery are the names to really know, with Corey Kiner pretty much transfer portal hard. They essentially lost pretty much all relevant, wide receiver production. D. Wiggins comes in, as a senior transfer last year, by way of Louisville and Miami. So he, again, has that upper tier conference competition, won't fold under pressure, knows what it's like to play big-time snaps. Donovan Ollie comes over from Washington State. Xavier Henderson, who comes over from Florida, played at Florida with Emory Jones. There's a little bit of a reunited, circumstance there, maybe some continuity early on, something of a connection that we can possibly look at. They also bring in Aaron Turner as a slot guy, originally from UConn. So these UConn guys are getting around here, as you're seeing. And Sterling Burkhalter, who transfers in from North Carolina A&T, was a pretty solid option there for them. So definitely some options for Emory Jones to throw the ball to, but will he throw the ball is the question. Will he kind of put things together in what is, his final season? Let's pull up Emory Jones stats here and see what we got, just to kind of look at when he gets his opportunity, or when he got his opportunity for Florida. It was really expected for him to, have a huge season as a starter, and that it really just didn't happen. Obviously, he threw for almost 3,000 yards, which is fine, 19 touchdowns, 13 interceptions, but it wasn't quite the season I think most people thought he might have. And with ASU, that obviously didn't happen at all. Ended up having to share Tyler quarterbacks, ends up throwing for 1,500 yards, 7 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, just about a 62% completion rate. Obviously, that's not wonderful. After rushing for 800 yards with Florida in his last year there and over 200 yards in back-to-back seasons, he rushed for just 31 yards on 59 attempts. He got flattened a whole lot. Did score 4 touchdowns on the ground, but that ASU O-line didn't do him any favors, and that offense in general just wasn't that great, which is why they have a new coaching staff, which we talked about on the Pac-12 conference preview show. So if Emory can get back to being lethal with his legs, that'll certainly help this group. he has the weapons to throw to. I like this group. I think they're all pretty solid candidates, and got no one that I expect to be super expensive the first couple of weeks. So we'll be able to get some Jones, pairing lineups and stacks with guys like Henderson or Ollie for probably pretty cheap. But as it stands right now with the Cincinnati team, I don't have any excitement about them, really. I'm not a huge fan of Emory Jones in general. I do like some of these pieces that they brought in, but to me, they're clearly one of the worst teams coming in, to the Big 12. And it's kind of not a hot take because, hey, these teams coming in, to the Big 12 their first year, they're going to get smacked around. And, that's probably going to be the case. And Cincinnati's used to being kind of the top dog the last few years. Then bring one starter from their O-lines. There's a lot of new, gelling that has to be done there. I just don't feel great about this team at all. So we'll see. But as it stands right now, it's not going to be at the top of my list to use them very often. But obviously things change as the season is played and the games are played for a reason. All right, University of Houston, the Cougars, another team that I think they're gonna definitely struggle here in year one of the conference. Things aren't going to necessarily be too great for them. They had a fantastic DFS purposes roster last year. They still have some guys with name value that we can look at in the receiving room. Joseph Manjack, Matthew Golden, who is a brand favorite of the show, Matthew Golden, and Samuel Brown, who kind of almost came out of nowhere last year to be relatively productive for DFS purposes. They also bring in a transfer that gives them another look there. Originally over at Wyoming, productive during his time with Wyoming. So there is another guy there that they can actually throw the ball to. They also, at the running back position, they've got Stacey Sneed and Brandon Campbell, both capable guys, but they do dip into the transfer portal to go grab Tony Mathis, which I do like quite a bit. West Virginia transfer, so technically an intra-conference transfer here, right, with Tony's offense. But I think they're going to be a team that definitely lacks a lot of continuity. It's going to take some time for them to gel, but I do think Mathis will get touches right away, and that is something that kind of makes me excited for him, especially when I consider that he won't be priced up all that much. At the quarterback position, they have Caleb McMickle, who's a freshman, Lucas Coley, who's a redshirt sophomore, and then they again dip into the transfer portal. Forrest Smith is a Texas Tech transfer, and really that was one of Jake's got Texas Tech. Obviously, they run a very fun offense, and Donovan Smith was a guy that I think most of the industry wanted to be able to rally behind and use him in a myriad of ways, and he was definitely viable at times, but it didn't turn out the way that I think a lot of us expected it to. The team itself, 8-5, that was fine. But offensively, I think there definitely could have been some better stuff out of that. And I think in year 2 and year 3, and they're going to be great. But Tyler Shuck, who threw for 1,300 yards, Baron Morton, who's obviously came on there midseason, over 1,100 yards, and then you had Donovan Smith, who threw for be a part of anything there going forward. So gets a chance to bolt out another intra-conference transfer. See him a lot and gets his chance to play for Houston and kind of ring in an era for them. As that is, I think year 2 Matthew Golden will be quite special, and I think Samuel Brown has an opportunity, like I said, to be pretty productive overall as well. So I still like this Houston team. I think offensively, yes, they're definitely going to be a team that we're talking about. We're mini stacking, all that stuff, but we won't be picking them or betting on them very often to win games, I don't think, because they're going to be another team sort of like Cincy, sort of like BYU, that's just going to find themselves at the bottom of the standings when it's all said and done. And not having Clayton Tune, I mean, that would have been a nice way to bring in the new era, right? And as far as receivers go, not having Tank Dale, that's going to be tough. You're replacing 15 or almost 1,500 yards, 17 touchdowns. But still, Matthew Golden, 38, 584 and 7 as pretty much the WR2, WR3 behind maybe Keshawn Carter. Samuel Brown, 41 catches, 471 yards, 4 touchdowns. So both of those guys, despite the fact that Tank had almost 1,500 yards receiving and Keshawn Carter had over 600, you still had Golden knocking on the door of 600, and Brown knocking on the door of 500. Manjack right around 200. So they have some quality returners here, and I think that Golden and Brown, for that matter, are definitely going to be in for a much, much bigger target share with Tank Dell out the door and at the professional level. All right, so moving on here. One more thing I got to get. It's better internet. We're upgrading everything else. So I got to tell the missus we might need to get a better internet. Iowa State Cyclones. Let's pull up their depth chart here. I don't know, man. It's like in basketball, the Big 12 is super exciting, but and then there's teams at the top of the Big 12 that I'm certainly excited about for football purposes, but there's a few teams that I'm just like really laissez-faire about. And this is one of them. Has an opportunity with some of these newer teams coming in the conference to be decent. But I still think you're talking about a team that's going to be at the bottom of the standings. Xavier Hutchinson gone off to the NFL. So if that's your number one guy, that's going to be tough. Their defense last year was solid. They do return a ton of starters from what I've seen. So I think their defense will still be fairly decent. But I worry if they get into some of these shootouts with some of these upper echelons offenses in the conference that they're just not going to have the pieces to keep up. Hunter Dekkers does return. We do like Hunter Dekkers on the show. He is somebody that we've used in the past returning. So I certainly don't hate the idea of backing him, on a every couple of slates or depending on the matchup. But he just really doesn't excite me. Jarrell Brown come into it, not necessarily the top returning running back. Tight ends, they've got a really deep group of tight ends, but it's going to be tough to really peg a usable option from a week-to-week basis. Dimitri Staniel and Jalen Noel are the two receivers that are your returners after Hutchinson gone that you can bank on being fairly productive or getting a lot of those targets. But again, neither of those guys look like guys that will jump over the 1,000-yard mark. They do bring in a transfer from Eastern Kentucky and Jaden Higgins, who was fairly productive at his time at EKU. And other guys such as Daniel Jackson, who are going to be on the depth chart, are going to be getting snaps, are going to be getting targets, but I just don't see a lot of it here. I think it's going to be for us last year with Iowa State. Obviously, Hutchinson was always expensive, but there was like the 3.5 Dimitri Staniel or the 4K Noel where you had this great lineup and you were looking for a cheap guy and you kind of could talk yourself into rostering one of those cheapies. Obviously, it didn't work all that often. It did a few times. I think we hit a Dimitri Stanley game or two. But the fact of the matter is this team is very, very meh to me. That could certainly change, and we could turn into some, every week you got to play Jarrell Brock. We know what this Iowa State offense has done in the past. They've created some really strong, running backs that we've been able to roster pretty much weekly in our main lineups. So it's not as if he won't have that opportunity, but just looking at this group, it's really not that exciting. All right, the Kansas Jayhawks. Now, this is a team I can get behind, not only for DFS purposes, but I think they'll win some games. I think we're probably talking about a top 5, top 6 team in the conference here, which may surprise some people. But, I mean, look at the influx of teams. It's going to be a really good opportunity for the Jayhawks to find themselves in a position to finish top 4, top 5, like I said, maybe even, top 3, depending on how things fall. Obviously, we've got Texas, we've got Texas Tech, Kansas State, Oklahoma. Like there's some still pretty heavy hitters in this roster to talk about, but I think Kansas has the chops, the weapons, the pieces, the continuity to really make some noise here and win some games. Jalen Daniels is back. Jason Bean is back. So, if Daniels gets injured or something else, Bean showed himself. Love Jalen Daniels. Love the running back position for Kansas between Devin Neal, who was my dude, and Daniel Hishaw. They do bring in a transfer. You may have heard of him, Dylan McDuffie, who it's a little puzzling to see him come in and transfer here by way of Georgia Tech and Buffalo. Super productive at Buffalo. Kind of a heavier hitter there. So he goes into a backfield where he's going to have to definitely share carries. They also have Sevion Morrison who factors in. So it's a really deep running back group, which is going to cause some definite tilt. Okay, it's okay that he's splitting carries because he has that touchdown equity and big playability. When he gets up to 7K, you just have to jump off because you're paying at that point for this high ceiling game. If it doesn't come, you're really, you're mutilated. Whereas at 5K, he scores a touchdown, but maybe he doesn't break a big one. You're still going to be okay, and the rest of your lineup hopefully has supported you in a way that you can overcome that. So I do like this running back group quite a bit. We'll pull up the stats for last year too, where you can really look at him. Skinner and Lawrence Arnold all return. Those three guys are going to dominate the touches for them. Mason Fairchild, their primary tight end one, he returns as well. So all the weapons that Daniels and Bean threw to last year, all returning. Do not sleep on this Jayhawks football team. Sorry, not basketball team. They're going to be really, really good, and they're definitely going to win some games. And again, this is the year. We've been waiting, or I've kind of been waiting with Lance Leafield for this Kansas program to really kind of turn that corner. We saw glimpses of it last year until injuries happened. If this team stays healthy, they're definitely going to win. They're definitely going to be above 500, and they'll go bowling for sure. You look at it last year in 9 games, missed some time. 2,000 yards for Jalen Neals, 18 touchdowns, just the 4 interceptions and a completion percentage of 66%. Absolute, just became a stud quarterback for DFS purposes by the end of it. Daniels also rushed for over 400 yards and 7 touchdowns. So big time work there. Jason Bean, 12 games, 1,200 yards, 14 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, 222 rushing yards, 4 touchdowns. Like to have Bean back there with Daniels and have that luxury, like, oh God, let's not hope for an injury, of course, but if it happens, at least we have a guy who can replicate some of that production. Again, at the running back spot, Devin Neal rushed for over 1,000 yards last year, 9 touchdowns, caught 21 passes for 183 yards and a touchdown. I love him. Hishaw, 262 yards, 5 touchdowns, 95 receiving yards and a touchdown. Just played in the 5 games. He had injuries, but when he was out there, looked really good. Had a YPC of 6. Neal, a YPC of 6.1. Sevion Morrison, a YPC of 7.2. And then you had Kai Thomas, who he never really got going with the team. He did score 3 touchdowns, but there's only so many touches that can go around when you have 2 running quarterbacks and you have 2 bona fide running backs in Hishaw and Neal. Either one of those guys could legitimately rush for 750 plus yards, together. It makes it hard for a RB4 to really get there going. And that's why I'm kind of questioning the Dylan McDuffie addition, at least not from Kansas' standpoint, obviously, but from McDuffie's standpoint, because I don't know where the workload comes for him. That's going to be more like the Georgia Tech situation for him. Because when you look at it, he was 1,000-yard rushers last year at Buffalo, played behind some really, strong running attacks there at Buffalo, but then he goes to Georgia Tech where he, in 8 games, gets only 22 carries, did score a touchdown, but 45 yards. And I worry about that for him here in this Kansas backfield. I think he'll do better than that, but it'll be like early season stuff where he gets carries when they're deeper in the season and they're, kind of fighting for an upper tier bowl game, perhaps. We're going to see Neal and Hishaw if they're healthy and probably not McDuffie. So just a depth piece there. The wide receivers last year for Kansas, you might be like, wow, there's so much rushing going on here. Why look at the receivers? Well, it's all price dependent. Now, last year there was some ludicrous prices on Kansas wide receivers early too. Like Arnold and Skinner had like over 7.5 and these big price tags. And it's like, there's no way on earth I'm paying that for a Kansas receiver. Now they are solid. Arnold caught 44 passes for 716 yards, 4 touchdowns. Luke Grimm, 52 catches, 623 yards, 6 touchdowns. Fairchild, 35, 443, and 6. Quentin Skinner, 26, 440, and 5. So like I said, solid options. but not guys that we're going to be paying that kind of pricing for. Maybe one of them develops into a receiver that starts to get close to 1,000 yards with this offense and the weapons and how much they like to run. Probably not, but you'll see all three guys, probably at 5 yards this year, and that's easy territory for a 5K or maybe even a 6K in a good matchup type of thing. But keep in mind, they're not going to go off together. They rarely do. You roster Arnold, you watch Grimm go nuts. You roster Skinner, you watch Arnold go nuts. So that is something. Or you get exposure to all three, and then you watch Mason Fairchild go nuts at the tight end spot. So it's really, really difficult to peg. I typically, another team here in the Big 12, I just like to target the either run the naked quarterback in Daniels, or I'm rolling one of those running backs. Typically for me, I'm a big Devin Neal guy, but I don't mind T-Shaw. One of those two guys, especially early on, I'll just be taking. By the way, I thought it was gunshots outside. It did not sound like a backfire. Did not sound like fireworks. Caused my dog to bark and the neighbor's dogs to bark. But when I went outside, I didn't see anything. Not like, what am I going to do? Hey, we're talking about football in here. Keep that down, would you? All right, the Kansas State Wildcats, who had a phenomenal basketball season. Surprising to everyone except the team at FTN. They have to replace Deuce Vaughn. Man, I can't even imagine life without Deuce Vaughn. CFB DFS without Deuce Vaughn is just like not a place that makes me feel very positive. Feel kind of depressed about it. They're losing a ton of stronger defensive backs. They do have Will Howard, who I think will have a shot to become one of the upper tier quarterbacks when it comes to DFS. That might make some of you fall over, but they have an offensive line that looks really, really good on paper. Preseason All-American type offensive line with Kid Cooper Beebe. So he's going to be protected. And Will Howard in the past, he wasn't protected quite as well. Now you saw him on his back a lot. I don't think that we'll see him on his back quite as much. So I like him. He's going to be in games where he's protected. Their defensive bench are kind of newer, are going to give up some points, and I think we'll see some shootout type games here for Kansas State, and an opportunity for Will Howard to really turn in some dynamite performances. So I'm actually sort of high on Kansas State, even though Deuce Vaughn's gone. Not being able to say the Deuce is loose anymore is obviously a very disturbing thing for me. I'm very excited typically for Deuce Vaughn slates. So the fact that we won't have many really made me quite sad if we're being honest. And it was such a nightmare last year because he should have had a bigger season. But he who has not been named, running at quarterback last year and stealing all the, just outrageous. So, but we don't have to worry about that anymore. Both are gone anyways. Will Howard, it's his show, his house. Now at the running back position, they've got a plethora of guys who are going to try to replace some of that production. And a lot of them are mostly young, unproven guys. Freshman Joe Jackson, redshirt sophomore DJ Giddens, redshirt sophomore James White. And then they bring in the transfer upperclassman, Florida State transfer Treshaun Ward, who has a lot of similarities to a guy like Deuce Vaughn in that he can break plays wide open. He can catch the ball a little bit. He can do a myriad of different things. That Florida State running group last year was very, very productive. And there's a reason why so many people are just, totally gaga over Trey Benson, because Ward's off to K-State, and that running attack is so strong. But Ward is a very good running back. All this talk about Benson, we need to talk a little about Ward probably getting RB1 carries and having the opportunity to add a bunch of targets to that as well. So I'm a big Treshaun Ward fan in this offense in particular with no Deuce Vaughn. We're not talking about 25 plus carries or anything ridiculous like that, but definitely double-digit carries, definitely going to get a handful of targets each game, and he's going to be in a position to have some nice touchdown equity as well. Wide receiver, Phillip Brooks, RJ Garcia, Erwin Nash, and Seth Porter. Those are the main returners. Jadon Jackson is there as well, who's originally an Ole Miss guy from a couple seasons ago, kind of buried on the depth chart, though, I would say. And then they do bring in Keegan Johnson, who is pretty young still in his career, transferring from Iowa. We talked a lot last week about how Iowa's offense will transform and be a little more exciting than we're accustomed to. So you might look at adding a receiver from, addition is definitely a guy that we're going to be able to look at. I think somebody that Will Howard will certainly be targeting a high share. You look at what he did last year, only played in the 2 games, but in 2021, 18 catches, 352 yards, 2 touchdowns in 9 games on that Iowa offense, which has been horrible for several years, or maybe not horrible is the right word, but anti-DFS. So I do feel kind of interested in Keegan Johnson here. Phillip Brooks is the one that I would be, kind of keying in on there. But this to me looks like it's going to be a situation where we're again looking at Will Howard naked, not literally, but without a receiver, or we're just going to the running game and we're just saying, hey, Treshaun Ward's going to get a lot of work. Let's ride it. Let's do this. Because still, even though Deuce Vaughn last year, and Treshaun Ward's not Deuce Vaughn, let's not get it twisted, but even with Adrian Martinez stealing a ton of touchdowns and a ton of carries overall last year, Deuce Vaughn still almost hit 300 carries and still almost rushed for 1,600 yards. Those touchdowns were low; they were 9, but 42 catches for 378 yards, 3 touchdowns. He was still a absolute monster of a weapon. And you look at what Will Howard did: 3 rushing touchdowns in parts of 7 games, over 1,600 passing yards, 15 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. He's got it, man. Will Howard's going to be able to do it. Throwing those kind of numbers in limited, opportunities with the receiving crew that they actually had is impressive. So now he's got the, continuity there with Phillip Brooks, who did have over 580 yards last year, 4 touchdowns. Losing Malik Knowles, 50 catches, 700 yards. Cade Warner, almost 50 catches, 500 yards, 5 touchdowns. I'm okay. Phillip Brooks, I think, is going to make a nice little step forward there alongside Will Howard as his guy. All right. Treshaun Ward. Got to get Treshaun Ward. Let me pull up Florida State real quick. I had a TV in the background and had to turn it off. I was getting a little too distracted. All right, so looking at the running game. So in 10 games for Treshaun Ward, 628 yards, 7 yards. Trey Benson just a tick under 1,000 yards. Now, Treshaun was the worst of the 3 when it came to pass catching, 6 catches for 19 yards. Trey Benson, 13 catches for 144 yards. Lawrence Toafili, 24 catches for 268 yards. Now, Ward missed some games, and I think he's a better pass catcher than maybe people remember, because in 2021, he actually caught 22 passes for 167 yards and a touchdown. So he is capable. He's just in a overly crowded backfield, obviously, and the opportunities weren't really there for him as much as they were, as getting carries. Now going into this season with Kansas State, the running back room has depth, but nobody that is really going to step up to the level of a Trey Benson or even a Lawrence Toafili, at least right now, that are going to challenge for carries, targets, just overall workload usage, that kind of thing. So I do like Ward maybe more than others, but I think he's certainly going to be a factor for us early on. And I really pride myself on finding running backs who are going to be relatively low owned. You guys know that at FTN we're one of the few places where you'll hear somebody say the 4 running back lineup. We sometimes call it the house of 4 running backs, the church of 4 running backs. We have put together some really strong lineups running a running back in the super flex. Now, I know the math, the numbers, this and that, and everything else say you got to run a quarterback in the super flex. You just got to do it. You got to do it. But these running backs, the last couple of years, we've been getting 25, 35, 40 fantasy points from these guys. You have a quarterback who, maybe doesn't hit that number as often, or he has an off game. He puts up an 18 to 25. Everybody rostered this second quarterback at 18 to 25 fantasy points. We had a 4th running back at 30 to 35. It doesn't always work, but we have been very, very successful in a lot more than I think people even realize. So because of that, I'm always looking for opportunities with lower owned running backs. And Treshaun Ward is somebody who I think may fit that category here, depending on the love affair for Will Howard that people have. All right, moving right along here, our next stop is the Oklahoma Sooners, a team that should certainly be much better than last year, with the what was it, 0-5 in one scores, I believe is the stat. I mean, brutality, the epitome of brutality, as our friend John Rothstein would say. That's, just super difficult to drop one score games like that. Their defense was awful. You could target a number of running backs against them last year. They were absolutely atrocious trying to defend the run. I think that this will be a much different version of the Sooners, one that maybe we're more accustomed to seeing, a much better group. And I short memory in DFS anyways, but I do think people sometimes have a tendency to really hang on to the prior year a little bit too long. So I'm thinking that maybe Oklahoma comes into it. People who live and breathe college football will know, but I think some people might kind of just write them off initially, and that would be a pretty big mistake. Obviously, Marvin Mims gone, one of their top receivers, but we got Dylan Gabriel back. And if you got Dylan Gabriel, you have one of the best quarterbacks in all of fantasy football at the collegiate level. I don't care what anyone says. Dylan Gabriel has been very, very good for us over the last couple of years. And he's somebody that still to this day ends up being really, really lower owned, and I just don't get it. And it's funny because when he is chalk, he ends up being kind of mediocre. But whenever we've gotten him over the last couple of years at lower rostership, really come through in a big way. So clearly I'm huge on Dylan Gabriel. He is capable of throwing for 400 plus yards. He's capable of rushing. He has a lot of talent in a lot of different ways that he can beat you. At the running back spot, they've got Marcus Major there, Javonte Barnes, who is kind of a breakout candidate, and Gavin Sawchuk. So they've got a strong running group. They've got depth there. They've got, Gabriel. They've got Austin Stogner, who the prodigal son, transferring in there, went to South Carolina, comes back to Oklahoma. So Austin Stogner back. I know people are excited about that, for him to run the spot there at the tight end spot. They also bring in a Texas A&M transfer, Blake Smith, to also play tight end. So a couple of solid, guys over there. At the straight up receiver spot, we're looking at a returner of Jaleel Farouk, Drake Stoops, Gavin Freeman, and then some transfers. Andrell Anthony, who I do like quite a bit. He's a Michigan transfer. We'll get into his stats in a second, but he's somebody that I really like next to Gabriel, and kind of developing into maybe one of his favorite targets potentially. And Brennan Thompson, who transfers over from Texas. Another intra-conference transfer. They're everywhere, man. They're just everywhere. You would never see that in the past. It just floors me how much we see transfers come from the conference, especially that you're going to see that former team. And, if you have a great game, then yeah, you're talking trash. But if they absolutely just shut you down, what an awful, awful feeling. So I don't know. I guess good on them for having the balls to do that, but it just always surprises me. So yeah, look for Oklahoma to bounce back from their 6-7 season, no doubt. Now, looking at the running game, Eric Gray had a huge season, over 1,300 yards. But Barnes really started to kind of ascend there up the depth chart, and you saw flashes of what he could do. Over 500 yards, YPC of about 4.5. I think that comes up this year. 5 touchdowns, 5 catches for 26 yards. But you look at Eric Gray, who caught 33 passes last year. I think Barnes will end up catching a lot of those. Marcus Major is a game. I don't think Major suddenly becomes a huge factor, though. He did have 200-plus yards on the ground, 60-plus yards as a receiver. I think really Barnes ends up being the dude. And then we saw Gavin Sawchuk in the 2 games last year, 17 carries, 105 yards, and a touchdown, YPC 6.2. I hearing great things about him. So very, very curious to see what he looks like as kind of like, the R2 to RB 1A, 1B situation here. So Sawchuk has the ability and could be very, very cheap when the season starts. Receiver-wise, again, having to replace Marvin Mims, that's a 1,000-yard receiver. They don't grow on trees by any means. Braden Willis also over 500 yards, 7 catches, 466 yards, 5 touchdowns. Drake Stoops, 39 catches, 393 yards, and 3 touchdowns. That's solid production coming back. They can definitely build off that. Gavin Freeman comes back. Played in bits of 7 games. LV Bunkley Shelton, who was an ASU transfer originally and had a very nice season there, all things considering. Just played the 2 games. Or sorry, he played in all 12, but only caught 2 passes for 24 yards, had a couple of carries. Mostly just a, blocker out there for the most part, running routes to, distract from the rest of the team. But he is definitely a guy that I think people are going to forget about a little bit because he was such a non-factor last year. And he really does have the ability to break games open. You look at 2021 with ASU, 33 catches, 418 yards, 2 touchdowns. Now you might look at that and be like, wow, that's really not a big deal. Why do I care about that? Not slate breakers, but on the slate ended up being an optimal play. I like his speed. I like his ability. He had some really solid, 4 for 76 type games, 2 for 68 and a touchdown. Just the classic 450 in one line. That's the show line when we're looking for cheapies. I don't know. I like him. I think he has the opportunity to kind of ascend here a little bit up the depth chart and maybe, be much more of a factor. So somebody that I want to pay attention to. But Andrew Anthony, he's in this pass or this receiver room. Looking at it, Michigan's lost some weapons. They have a ton of weapons coming back. We talked at length last week, but they definitely lost some guys that would ordinarily hurt a team to lose a talented athlete like that, but not them, of course. And you look at Andrew Anthony, and you're not going to be a couple years ago. So, catches for 80, but it's just really solid athlete that I think can kind of maybe a mini breakout in this offense and has a ton of ability and I think can handle a much heavier workload. So I'm very, very interested to see how that works out for him. But one of the guys that I'm kind of keeping my eye on here throughout camp and seeing if we're going to be able to roster him right away. Because looking at the rest of the receivers, like I said, Jaleel Farouk, I think is going to be one of the more popular options and has the best opportunity to maybe replicate what Mims just did. But guys like, Drake Stoops and Brendan Thompson, you don't expect me quite as Anthony can step in there and kind of touch down something like that. But the Sooners will be back. I hope their defense is going to be better too, but I really hope it's not, because how fun is it to stack Oklahoma games for and against? I don't want that to end just yet. All right, moving right along, we have Oklahoma State, the Cowboys. They this team, they're right in the middle for me of where I think they'll end up. Anywhere from 5th down to 9th wouldn't really surprise me. Seasons doesn't necessarily have the most yeehaw seasons, but he wins games. He does enough to be over 500. So I mean, they're gonna go bowling. They're not probably going to be anything super exciting. They do have a favorable schedule. We went ahead and looked at schedules for some of these teams. They have 5 home games in the conference, and they also don't have to play TCU. They don't have to play Texas Tech. And they don't have to play Texas. So a very favorable schedule for Oklahoma State, and I think that's something that people might overlook a little bit too with their matchups, because I think a lot of people are just going to write them off because they're a little bit different at a key position like the quarterback. And right now, Alan Bowman, who somehow still has eligibility, has gone from like being super DFS viable for us at Texas Tech to not at all at Michigan to all over now. He's fighting for a job or for the starting job at Oklahoma State. True freshman Zane Flores there, Garrett Rangel. So we'll see what happens there. They do have a really strong or projected to be strong running game in Ollie Gordon and Jaden Nixon. The offensive line is really, really strong. They've been together a while. So again, and stop me if you've heard this before, but another Big 12 team where I think we're going to be looking at the running backs a lot. And I'm going to be certainly looking to stack Big 12 running backs, I think, a lot this year. I really, really like Jaden Nixon. I think Ollie Gordon has maybe more of the popularity factor with the rest of the industry, but Jaden Nixon is somebody that I'm fairly excited about and looking forward to having the opportunity to roster. And that's going to be one of those situations where we want to either roster the cheaper of the two, or we want to take who's projected to be lower owned. It's going to be like, Katron Allen, Nicholas Singleton type of situation there at Penn State, where there's just going to be games where one or the other, one game Ollie goes off, the next game Jaden goes off, and they're going to take turns in that regard. It's going to be frustrating, but I think you alleviate some of that by simply taking the cheaper of the two. Or, like I said, if you find someone who's projecting ownership at a decent level, FTN, you can just go with the one that's going to be lower owned. But you look at the rushing yardage last year with Spencer Sanders at the helm. There wasn't anybody who really seized the opportunity. Dom Richardson, who everyone but me thought he was going to be the bell cow of all bell cows. I was still mad at Dom Richardson for 2 years ago because it was like week 3 or week 4 where he was super chalky. Oklahoma State had like 5 running backs they could use, and Dom Richardson chalk goes for like 35. So dumb. But he rushed for 543 yards, 22 catches for 220 yards. Productive. We just mentioned he transferred out of there. You take out Spencer Sanders, 400 rushing yards, and you're left with the following. Ollie Gordon, 308 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns, 12 catches, 76 yards. Jaden Nixon, 181 yards, 21 catches, 189 receiving yards, 3 touchdowns. Now, that's why I like Jaden Nixon a lot, because he's a versatile weapon. He may not be the most decisive runner of the two between him and Gordon, but I think his versatility as a pass catcher really makes him intriguing. And we know we want those running backs, obviously, that are going to be getting the bell cow carries. But if that's not going to happen, or that's not possible, then we want to divert back pass catching running backs and guys who are going to get those targets. And he's somebody who's certainly going to turn those targets into yardage and have the opportunity to score. Pretty much second on the team in terms of running back reception yards behind Dom Richardson. And he looked really, really good when he was out there. So I would have loved to have seen a full season of Jaden Nixon in a starter role, or, without Dom Richardson. That didn't happen, but it will happen this season. So I'm looking forward to seeing what happens there with those 2 running backs. And they're going to be favorites of mine, I have a feeling. Let's pull up. All right, depth chart time. The wide receivers for Oklahoma State have kind of been up and down over the last few years. It's another one of those situations where a couple of years ago, Rashad Owens looked like he was going to reach out and take that. Just didn't quite work out. Blaine Green shown flashes, didn't quite work. Brennan Presley has shown flashes. So you have all those guys back. Owens, Presley, Green, and Bray all back. So you have that, oh man, where the target's going to go. But then you enter a few other weapons into the mix that are going to definitely factor in. Arlen Bruce, who is a Iowa transfer. I know these Iowa guys. And Deshaun Stribling, who is a Wazoo transfer. Moderate to borderline, I don't want to say elite, but for DFS purposes, really, really intriguing, viable, all those words you want to use. I think that it's going to be hard to peg on a week-to-week basis. I really like Stribling. I actually really like Presley as well. Arlen Bruce showed some flashes of being a versatile weapon during his time with Iowa. There's a lot to like here for this Oklahoma State team. They're going to be very, very solid in the running game. And I think going into some really good options when team play for these receivers to break some games open and have some big games. It's going to be a revolving door of production at the receiver spot. But if you can peg it right, or you're a multi-enter guy, you want to make sure that you just rush in a couple pretty much weekly on one. I think something left. Don't sleep on him. A couple of years ago for Texas Tech, he was anchoring my lineups, man. Like he was 6K and out there for Texas Tech doing some big things. So people don't remember him probably because they have short memories again. But Alan Bowman can huck it, and he's got the receiving weapons to do so, and he's got a nice running the game behind him to keep defenses honest. So I like him. I like him in this spot, and I think that I think he'll be better than people realize, and he'll be much more of a usable week-to-week option. And I think people will be better served to prepare for that now than in week 3 after Bowman's put up back-to-back 30s because the Golden State offense just went completely ballistic. And remember, I just mentioned they have a very favorable offense, and they don't have to play teams like Texas. They're going to get some of the other teams that are just coming into it or some of the bottom feeders. Bowman's going to have an opportunity to put up a lot of points here on this team. Do not sleep. All right, moving right along here. TCU off the dream season. I mean, it's TCU in the Big 12, TCU football, the surprise, Kansas State basketball, the surprise, just, two teams that a lot of people really didn't expect what they did to happen. And it absolutely did. Still liking TCU, even though there is, a plethora of pieces that are getting replaced. Really have to like it though. Chandler Morris coming in here to really finally take a hold of the quarterback job. I know that he had it last year, got injured, stuff happened, but he doesn't really have to look behind him. Chance Nolan's in there just, as a clipboard holding emergency option. Like God forbid, and Morris gets hurt again, and Chance Nolan has to come in and pull an Oregon State. But Chandler Morris, a healthy Chandler Morris is something to be excited about, I think, here for DFS purposes and otherwise. Just if you're a fan of good football in general, or you like watching games Saturday morning, Chandler Morris is going to be fun to watch. You look at last year in the games he was able to play. He looked really sharp. Obviously try to play a little bit, and Hacksaw Duggan comes in and just has an amazing season. But think about the season Max had: almost 4,000 passing yards, 3,700, 32 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. Just a ridiculously strong season for anyone there, just passing the football. But then you look at it, he rushed for 9 touchdowns on the ground, 423 rushing yards. Think about that. What he just did. Chandler Morris pretty much beat him out in camp last year. It was Morris who was going to be the QB1, Morris who was going to run this team. And Hacksaw comes in and just has a lack of a better term, like a maniacal season, like the most Jekyll and Hyde thing I've ever seen when it comes to Duggan. Because so it makes me feel like, hey, Morris beat him out. He just had this amazing season. What's a healthy Chandler Morris going to do? So I just feel like he's going to be a big weapon. Somebody that, unfortunately, I think his price is going to balloon really quick. So it's going to be tough to use him. You remember when Max's price went up, people were really getting afraid of him, but he was still throwing up 30 and 40 bombs with regularity. But I love Chandler Morris. I think he's absolutely an obvious breakout candidate. Assuming and hoping and praying that he stays healthy, he's going to be a dude that will anchor our lineups all season long. Quentin Johnson, WR1 gone, RB1, Kendre Miller gone. So, I mean, it's a totally different look here for TCU. Defense, when you have a season like that, you're going to lose guys to the draft. That's just obviously going to happen. But you look at the running back spot, they still bring back Amani Bailey, who I really like. Bailey, with Kendry Miller, just a psycho, right? He did us very well. 1,400 yards, 17 touchdowns, just absolute nuts. Amari DeMarcado rushed for almost 700 yards, 6 touchdowns. Like, Bailey didn't get a ton of opportunity there like I had originally hoped for him. He did rush for 250 yards, and that was with a YPC of 8.1, so 31 carries. So extremely productive when he did get carries. Obviously saw all shred teams time and time again. That line was awesome. But Bailey really, really broke plays and showed himself to be a very elusive guy that's hard to bring down. Also caught 7 passes for 43 yards. Now, when Bailey came over to TCU, I expected a little bit bigger of a role. When he was at Louisiana, his first year as a wash, whatever, redshirted freshman. Second year, 642 yards. OPC there of 600 reach, also caught 15. That's very run heavy. So I thought coming into it, like 500 plus yards, Kendry Miller probably split. Didn't quite work out that way, but now you look at the projected depth chart and who they have coming in at the running back spot. After him, it's Corey Wren, Trent Battle, okay. But they do bring in Trey Sanders, who couldn't quite put it together. Big-time pedigree, Alabama transfer, gonna have that opportunity. But the nice thing here, even if Sanders has the breakout or he gets the RB1 carries, there isn't a DeMarcado or somebody else on the roster. Bailey will get either RB1 carries or Auto piping him for usage and popping him out there. And because Bailey suddenly to seize this job, or at least a 60-40 type split, like I just don't think Trey Sanders comes into it and gets 30 plus carries. So I'm still very high on Bailey, and I think he's a bit of a sneak coming into the season by far. Wide receiver, pretty much the only. So look at the list here. Savion with production lost. Let's get over here. Let's get out of Monty Bailey's page. So 1,100 yards of Quentin Johnson, gone. 613 yards of Tay Barber, gone. Darius Davis, 531 yards, out the door. You have Savion Williams there, fourth on that list. 392 yards, 30 catches, 4 touchdowns. So he's your primary returner of note. You lose a ton of other guys, Tre'Quavious Spivey, Gunnar Henderson, like just a ton of different guys who produced or were a part of your, primary offensive production just out the door. So they went into the portal and they went hard. At tight end, they go and get Jack Becht, who, if for the LSU Tigers, somebody who I certainly like to a degree here at this TCU roster. I think adding him into it, they have some other blocking options who are going to get time too. But Jack Becht, definitely a guy to keep an eye on there. JoJo Earl, then another Alabama transfer, somebody high pedigree. Didn't quite put it together with that Alabama roster. Alabama gets a ton. It's crazy because they obviously have talent walking in the door galore. And sometimes you get those high pedigree, high star guys who just don't pan out. They get lost in the shuffle. So Urban Sanders coming to TCU to try their luck. I'm excited about that. JP Richardson transfers over from Oklahoma State. He's a very productive guy who can break it deep at any time. He'll work well in this offense. They also have a plethora of transfers who are going to have to get work. Dylan Wright transfers over from his COVID season. He's somebody from Texas A&M, Minnesota, been around the way there. He's going to be a factor in this offense. Jalen Robinson comes over. Jalen Robinson, gosh, UCF was where he was most productive. Old Miss, gotta even remember where it was, Oklahoma. All around, now he's at TCU in the COVID year, so a chance for him to bounce back and hit his numbers like he was at UCF. Warren Thompson, another transfer upperclassman guy, spent time at Florida State and Arkansas. So there's just a ton to like in this receiver room for TCU, and they're all pretty much upperclassmen. They don't have any youngsters who are going to have to really, learn things. I mean, they have a couple freshmen, sophomore guys that I don't expect to be much factors yet, but they have 6 different guys of junior or better who have played in various levels of SEC, Big 12, big time football that are going to be factors. So this is a very fun looking offense just because they lost so much production from last year. People could make the mistake of writing them off, but there's just no way they don't put up video game numbers again. Really strong group. I think they'll mesh well quickly, and Chandler Morris just a super obvious option to break out and be one of the best quarterbacks in not only the conference, but maybe the country when it comes to DFS purposes. Texas, University of Texas, the Longhorns. It's fun to say we're back and make fun of them, but I think, we really got to consider the fact that they're here. They're not back. They're just here, and they're ready to put up some numbers. I think Texas, man, they were such a fun team last year for DFS. Jatavian Sanders, brand favorite tight end, hitting on him several weeks in a row, scoring that low-owned touchdown for us. When people caught on, he became chalk and he kind of fell off, but he's our guy. He returns tight end. See Jordan Whittington and Xavier Worthy returns, Isaiah Nair, Casey Kane. Just some really good continuity here with this Texas offense. Quinn Ewers, of course, Jonathan Brooks, Keelan Robinson. Obviously, Texas is losing some heavy hitters in that running back room, but Brooks, Keelan Robinson, Jadon Blue, there's some guys here that are definitely going to be able to factor in. And I don't think we see – obviously there's going to be some step backs, right, because you don't just have a superstar like that Texas did walk away and you just kind of waltz forward without it hurting. But we're talking about a Texas program here that is just bringing in talent by the bushel, and they're going to find a replacement for Bijan, whether that's 2 guys replacing Spin or, one of those guys steps up and does so. I think not a bigger loss, but equally as important loss is Roshan Johnson. I think the 1-2 punch of Bijan, a change there. But I think that what we'll see, Texas kind of shore up that receiving game, that passing game a little bit, and rely on that a little bit more. But they definitely, with Keelan Robinson, we know what he can do, and Brooks looking like a dude, will do well. And Quinn Ewers in year 2, watch out, because he's going to be way more accurate, way more aggressive. And I think Xavier Worthy is going to be the main benefactor there. Jordan Whittington will, of course, be productive. And then they do go into the portal themselves for a productive name brand guy and Adonai Mitchell from Georgia, who will certainly, worthy there for WR1 targets. But that's just going to make this Texas offense open up even more. So they are clearly, when you look at it, TCU very high on them, Oklahoma, Kansas State. To me, Texas probably a top 2 team here. If not, what do you got to say? Like Oklahoma will bounce back. So much hype and so much written about Sanders. He's clearly not a sneaky guy anymore, which sucks. But this offense is really good. I can't express enough or stress enough how the offensive line matters so much. All 5 starters for Texas returning in that O-line. So look out, man. Texas, clearly the hype is going to be bigger than it's been in a while. Now, historically, we've seen that hype kind of fizzle out. As long as they stay healthy, I don't think that happens this year. All right, Texas Tech, Jake Kuchek's team, the video game offense. This is the team that, moves on from Donovan Smith. They have Tyler Shuck back, Aaron Morton back, who Baron Morton looks like he's going to be a stud in the future. Taj Brooks returns, Cameron Valdez, so continuity there. Miles Price, Deron Brandley, J.J. Sparkman, Xavier White, Nehemiah Martinez, and Loic Fuanji, all back in this offense. They do have a transfer coming, McCray. Now, if that name sounds familiar, it probably should. He played for Austin Peay last year, and Austin Peay was on the slate early on in the season. Austin Peay had or I should say Texas Tech had a front row look. God, why is my computer? All right. At Austin Peay. And they were a team that, obviously it's Austin Peay, was competitive. Very, very competitive. And I don't know. This Dre McCray, if you don't recall him, was not backing down from any opponent, and just a guy that I think is going to be a big time factor in this offense. Now, there's a plethora of wide receivers there. It's going to be a situation where, yes, 1 week it's this guy, 1 week it's this guy. But for the most part, I do think McCray will be fairly consistent. Out of all the receivers on this team, I think he's going to be the most consistent. You look at what he did throughout his time. It was a prep star. He had 75 catches for over 1,000 yards, 9 touchdowns last year with Austin Peay. Almost 5,000 all-purpose yards during his prep career. Like, Dre McCray is absolutely the real deal, and somebody who can absolutely have a monstrous season in this offense. Year prior to that, 52 catches, 872 yards, 8 touchdowns. So, I mean, he's a guy, man. He is a bona fide, legitimate guy who can do some serious under 6K. It's an absolute slam because him taking over and becoming WR1, WR2. Now, it's kind of like WR1A, 1B, 1C, 1D, 1E in this offense sometimes, and that's okay. But for the most part, McCray's the guy that I'd be using in my main. And then, just rotating through the other options like Price, White, Fuanji. Last year, earlier part of the season, Loic Fuanji went nuts, and then he kind of, didn't hear from him again until later on in the year. So guys like that I'm a little bit more nervous about. I'm not the biggest fan of Tyler Shuck for what it's worth, but this offense will produce, and that is definitely not going to disappoint us at the end of the day. All right, last two teams, UCF and West Virginia, probably aren't going to be other team coming into the conference here in UCF that historically has been awesome, has had fantastic weapons, and has been able to put up some points. They do have another brand favorite at FTN, John Rice Plumlee, or JRP, Timmy McClain, Xavier Williams, who is a Maction transfer, Gunnar Smith. They have a multitude of quarterback transfers here they're bringing in. Xavier Williams was over at Charlotte, played fairly decently there at times as an injury replacement. Gunnar Smith, who is a redshirt freshman, and Dylan Risk. So they have a deep group at quarterback and all really young guys. So after JRP, they're going to have, their next guy, their heir apparent here somewhere. But all different guys that I kind of like in different ways. So I'll be intrigued to see who ultimately comes in here. Gunnar Smith was at South Florida for a bit. All right, so JRP can do it all. We've seen him, the man would win the punt, pass, and kick competition, hands down. We've seen him catch passes. We've seen him throw passes. We've seen him run. He can do it all. So having him at your disposal is great. The offensive line does lose multiple pieces, so there's some transfers coming in there. I hate seeing that. They do have a plethora of strong options at the running back spot. R.J. Harvey, the obvious play there. Johnny Richardson, who I'm not ready to give up on. He's still my guy. And DeMarcus Bowman. Now, coming into the year, I thought Johnny Richardson would have that breakout that R.J. Harvey did. It turns out that Harvey was that guy, and Richardson. But over the last couple of years, he's shown us flashes, and I'm still confident that he can turn out and be a weekly starter for us to use in DFS. But I think RJ Harvey's going to have the opportunity to get the lion's share of the carry. So it's a little bit difficult there to look at in terms of, I'm a big fan of Richardson, but I have to be smart, right? Javon Baker's back, Kobe Hudson's back, Xavier Townsend also. So getting those options all back is nice. Corey Gamage comes in from Marshall. That is a big WR1 guy there. Trent Whitmore, WR3, possibly even better. Kind of re-upping behind Javon Baker and Kobe Hudson, who are 1 and 2 for me. And then Chauncey Magwood, who is another upperclassman transfer. Should factor in, was at Kentucky, showed flashes at times, not a consistent performer, but somebody who can definitely do well. So the UCF team, the offense for UCF, it's definitely nasty. It has pieces. I just worry about them getting hit in the mouth a little bit here. Defensively, I'm worried about the defense. And I don't love the fact that the offensive line has, I think it's 3 new starters. And I might harp on that a little bit too much or worry about that a little bit too much. The continuity, which teams had, the most returners, which teams were replacing their O-line. And it definitely was a difference to be seen. So I do pay attention to that a lot. And that's something that I try to veer away from, at least initially, if I see a lot of new faces on that O-line. But this offense is going to be awesome. And at the end of the day, JRP, even if the offensive line breaks down, he has the legs. He's from a defender. He can do some damage. So I think that it's going to be a fun team to stack up, but it's another one that is going to probably lose games. But it's perfect because they'll be playing from behind or they'll be in shootouts, and you're going to want multiple pieces of that offense because it's going to turn into a situation putting up 40 points in a loss. All right, moving along here, West Virginia, and then we'll close out. Now, West Virginia, they have a fairly wide range of outcomes because the last couple of years they've been rock solid. You would think that being in the conference, they'd be ahead of the Houstons and the UCFs, but I'm not sure they are because aside from our guy and other brand favorite, C.J. Donaldson, who happens to be a running back in the Big 12, we're high on running backs in the Big 12. That's the theme of the show. I'm just not that excited about anyone else on this team. Garrett Green at quarterback, whoop-de-doo. The returners at wide receiver are very, very weak, I guess, from a production standpoint. They did go into the transfer portal. They got Devin Carter from NC State, who I do like and is a capable receiver, and Jashawn Polk, who's using his last year COVID season from Kent State. Polk, who was in that high-flying Kent State offense, definitely has proven himself to be a kind of a game breaker, can score on any touch type of player. And then a Marshall transfer in E.J. Horton, but he's not he's not Corey Gamage. So let's say that. Looking at it, it's really all about C.J. Donaldson for me. They do get Cole Taylor as a transfer in at tight end, who is another SEC transfer in this conference from LSU, along with Jack Becht, who comes into the Big 12. But does an absolute ton of work. Let's pull up last year. Now we know Mathis is gone, right? We talked about that earlier. He's transferred out. Justin Johnson, who also rushed. So Tony Mathis, 562 yards. Justin Johnson, 430 yards. And then Donaldson was in there with 526. But Johnson played 12 games. Mathis played 10. Various injuries and guys sitting out. Donaldson was only able to play 7. So second on the team, and it was only about 40 yards behind Mathis in 3 less games and had more yardage than Johnson in 5 less games. Showed himself a capable receiver, 9 catches for 27 yards. Had he been able to play, I think Green's going, they're going to feed him the ball a lot. You look at it, Jalen Anderson, or Johnson is back, excuse me. And then they have a freshman, Jaheim White. Like Donaldson with Mathis gone, I think that ups his receptions, that ups his overall touches. I think, you know, his YPC was 6 last year. Very explosive weapon. We know that we'll get to have him like, you know, 3.5, 4K, like silly prices that he was when healthy last year. But he's definitely going to be a guy that I think we look at, and he's a little bit immune to, you know, bad game script, or there's going to be, oh, West Virginia's playing this weekend, they're going to lose by 20. We can't use Donaldson because they're going to pass the ball a lot. Okay, that might be true, but Donaldson's going to be getting those looks too. Now, of course, if he's priced at 8K and we think his carries are down, we can't use him. But if he's there at 5K or even 6K, his pass catching ability or those targets that I believe will come his way will make him a viable option. And people will automatically write him off and not use him, thus bringing his ownership way down low, because a lot of people just do the simple game script's going to be bad, can't use him. Game script's going to be good, I'll use him. People still build lineups that way based off game script when there's a lot more to worry about. So CJ Donaldson is a brand favorite for FTN, and we will be using him a lot. The theme of the Big 12 is running backs. The running backs in this conference are fantastic. There are a lot of viable options. Quarterbacks, there are some upper echelon ones. There are some bottom feeder ones. And there's a lot of crowded receiver rooms in the conference. That's the main kind of the conference here. Crowded receiver rooms, top-heavy quarterbacks, really, really strong, stackable running backs from this conference. That will do it. Next week, we'll be back with another conference preview breakdown, talking about depth charts, talking about transfers, all that good stuff. We are literally just over a month from week 0 before you know it. In the next few weeks, we'll get our guy Jake on here and some co-host action, and we'll be breaking down that week 0 slate in full, giving you cores, giving you prize picks, talking about college football. You know you love it. Get over to @DubDeuces85 on Twitter. And if you're not a member of FTN Daily or the FTN Network yet, you definitely should subscribe to the YouTube channel, and also get over and use DUB, which still offers you a discount for all your signups at FTN Daily or FTN Bets. I am Walter Waddell. Appreciate your support as always. And the Super Show will be back next week. Same time, same place. Better camera coming. Be ready. Thanks, guys. See you tomorrow. Don't forget to check my Twitter tomorrow for some more TBT action. See ya.